Howdy, I'm Northern Dice, and I'm going to be infoboxing my copy of Bloodborne, the board game. So, for those of you who are not aware, an infoboxing is a bit like an unboxing, but I'm going to talk through the components because I actually know what they are. My unboxing was full of just excitement and lots of energy. This is going to be, hopefully, a little bit more informative. So we're going to open it up. I'm going to try and get everything out. I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm almost going to repack the box to explain everything. So for those of you who aren't aware, Bloodborne is a cooperative 1 to 4 player campaign-esque game whereby you as hunters are taking on the horrors of the hunt based on the video game of Bloodborne. So this is the bottom layer of the box with everything exposed. Underneath these cards are action cards for bosses and a little token that should sit there, but the indentation didn't occur. So I am just going to start with top to bottom, and then we'll work through the rest of the components. So on this top half, I know you can't see it very well for the light, are the actual campaigns that you will play. And these campaigns come in chapters. So you have an introduction which explains the actual concepts for the hunt. And then you have 3 chapters that you go through. And some of these chapters will indicate which enemies to bring. Some will tell you which specific tiles, with that symbol being the number of hunters. So number of hunters times 2 random tiles with a maximum of 6. Some, on the other hand, will have special rules cards, long hunt card 17, which is a specific setup. I don't want to look through these for you. I've played the long hunt campaign, and I've played the Secrets of the Church. I know what happens, but I haven't experienced everything because the campaign runs on a system of choice quite frequently. And you might get a choice whereby you encounter a non-playable character, and the non-playable character says, is there any chance you could help me traverse this hunt and appear at the graveyard, for example? And it will say, if you agree, reveal card 18. If you disagree, reveal card 19, and that will have a lasting effect. What else is inside this is the main hunt and insight missions. And what insight missions are, is they're almost like little side quests that you can do. And you gain insight into what is happening in the hunt that evening. And when you finish an insight mission, you would receive an insight card. And it would look a bit like this. And any time the game refers to insight, as in collected 3 insight, for example, you would need 3 of these cards. Collecting insight is an important part of the game, and quite often the actual campaign chapters will say, when you appear on a certain tile, reveal this mission, reveal this card, and it'll be an insight mission because you've discovered something. You can traverse the fog gate and encounter whatever it is you're fighting, be it a nightmare or be it a beast, if you've got 2 insight. Or it might say, for example, later on in the campaign, if you showed mercy to someone, reveal this card. If you didn't, show this card. So what you do has lasting effects in that sense of it being a campaign. Moving down, on this side we have got the actual bosses that you can encounter. And do not be under the impression that 4 campaigns, 4 bosses. I promise you fully, you may encounter some of these beasties in the middle of some of these hunts. So we'll go for the Cleric Beast. And the Cleric Beast card, as a main point, has 2 sides. You have Phase 1 and Phase 2. And with this, you also have numbers underneath, and that indicates the number of players. So in Phase 1, for a 4-player game, the Cleric Beast would have 24 health. For Phase 2, 20 health. And these bosses are quite often linked to chapters in the campaigns, and it'll be a case of when the beast enters Phase 2, do something. You also have action cards, which is important because it means they do not run off of the enemy stack, and these attacks are unique to the boss. They are very hard hitting. They quite often hit all hunters on a certain tile, and they're quite difficult to avoid as well. But being boss enemies, you'd expect that, really. The same for Vicar Amelia, the Blood-Starved Beast, and Father Gascoigne. So let's move on to this side, and in this stack here I have got 2 types of cards. We have Consumables, which can be found across Yharnam, the map that you will create, as little item tokens, and these are one-time use. It is a case of use it and discard it, and they are so important. You can see that they do different things, so like clear 1 attack slot, draw a card, remove a poison, deal 2 damage to 1 enemy in your space. These have no limit on how many you can have, but you have to interact with the item, so spend a card in order to do so. These, on the other hand, are almost like reward cards, come items you will keep, and Carol Wounds. Now, these are mixed up because I've played the game and I have not put them back into the order they belong. But you can have 2 Carol Wounds and 2 special items per hunter. So across you all, you could have 8 Carol Wounds and 8 special items, but they only apply to that hunter, for example. And they all say hunter turn, which means that on your turn as a hunter, you can flip these to activate them. Some of them have lasting effects, some of them have triggered effects. Some, like the Bloodstone Shard, actually go onto your weapon and do certain things, and you can rotate where they are when you transform your weapon. But we'll come on to that in a second. Then we have these cards, which are attack cards. And these are specials. Let me just try and get all of these out. These have got the enemy actions as well underneath. Perfect. So I'll put these to one side. So these are upgrade cards that you can get by going to the Hunter Dream. And what that is a special place in the game that you will go to and can upgrade yourself if you've killed enemies and gained Blood Echoes. And Blood Echoes are only gained by defeating enemies, and you only get to spend the Blood Echoes if you go to the Hunter Dream by choice. And these replace your previous cards. You start with 12 basic cards. 3 Strength, 3 Dexterity-isk, 3 purple ones, can't remember the name, and 3 Dodge. And these follow the same format of green being quite quick movement, purple being based around drawing cards or healing, blue being about being quite quick, and the grey ones being about hitting things really hard and getting rewards for doing so. Upgrading your deck is paramount. Along with that, you also have the actual basic cards, which are very, very simple in their setting. So this will allow you to stagger an enemy, which means that if you attack them quicker than they attack you, you will stop them from attacking. Or you have a basic +1 damage, a basic draw 1, or a basic dodge. And the dodge allows you to clear a slot. It's important, and I will reference the actual tweet from Michael Shinall about this. All cards that are played to attack slots, so on your actual weapon, trigger effects. So if I were to use this to move, I wouldn't be able to stagger anything. If I use this to pick up an item, I wouldn't be able to add 1 damage. If I use this to dodge or to attack, I still get to clear the slot, which means I play the card, run it through, take it off. Important stuff, because we spent a lot of our first game filling our weapons up really quickly with dodges, thinking we could only do that on an attack. And then we have the actual enemy actions. I know it's not the full set, but it's just 3 as an example. And what these are is you have enemy cards, like these, and they have 3 types of attack. So when an enemy engages in combat with you, you would both choose an attack. So for you, you would lay an attack card onto your weapon to show you're attacking, and you would draw a single card from this deck to show what the enemy did in response. Whoever's quicker, so whoever has the most arrows, would hit first, and they would do that much damage. And any effects there would also happen. So in example, if you were to try and stagger an enemy, it would be a case of you were quicker, so they don't get to attack. Some attacks say cannot be staggered. Some say stun, which means that if you get stunned, you would have to lose a card or take an extra damage, which can be quite detrimental. Choosing when to take that damage and when to just discard the card and bite the bullet is really important, because quite often, unfortunately, you are going to be in a position where you are being attacked more frequently than you would possibly like. So I'm going to put those back under there. Tuck these in there as well. And then we'll quickly go through the tokens before I go back onto the enemies. So these are health tokens or damage tokens. If they're on your player card, you'll use them as health. You have 6, and as you get hurt, you take them off. And when you're on 0, your hunter is dead. Death is not the end. You will go to the Hunter's Dream. On enemies, though, you would probably use them to place next to the actual model, because there may be more than one church servant about. You want to track how much damage you've done to that one. You have here a fair few tokens. I'm going to have to go through a few of them. So we have corpse tokens, which are integral to quite a few insight missions. We have insight tokens, which track different elements of things. Sometimes on bosses they can track so much of something they've done, or on insight missions they can track how frequently something has been completed. You have non-player characters who you may need to escort or hunt down, depending on which campaign you're doing and which options you choose within that. We also have poison tokens, fog gates, and frenzy tokens. Now, fog gates just cannot be traversed. It's a case of if you are inside of one, you can't escape. You need to use a certain tile to get inside to then fight whatever's there. And generally speaking, fog gates block enemies from spawning inside, but house bosses. Poison, I believe, I will have to just double check in a moment, run on the basis of if you are poisoned, if you're told to get another poison, you take damage. And frenzy, I believe, is quite detrimental to movement and actions. I will just reference that very quickly. So poison, I remember it now because I did suffer this quite badly, is a case of if you are poisoned at the end of every turn, you take an extra you take 1 damage. And frenzy makes you lose an extra health anytime you attack, so all enemy attacks against you are +1. So tokens you don't want, but you can remove them by going to the Hunter Dream or by using items. Speaking of which, item tokens to indicate where items are. You interact with them on the map and remove them. Then we have in here, I believe these are, Blood Echoes. So these are the rewards for killing enemies. Any hunter can only ever hold 3. If you die, you lose them all. If you go to the Hunter's Dream, you immediately remove them all and gain upgrade cards for how many you've got. And non-player character tokens, which indicate where non-player characters who are key to certain events are. Moving on to some of these cards, here we have the Hunter Arms, which are a sidearm, effectively a ranged weapon for hunters to utilise. They can be gained as rewards from campaigns, or are a standard for certain hunters. They are indicated by actually having their image on them, but quite often there is a double side for it to be expelled. And I think there is also a standard one as well. No, not for the Hunter Pistol, there isn't, sorry. The one that you start with as a hunter is usually specific to that hunter's build, or very, very weak. An example, the Hunter Pistol is okay, but if they make a basic attack, you can stun them. Whereas Ludwig's Rifle, you can exhaust that to deal 2 damage to an enemy who enters your space. And when one weapon is exhausted, it tells you how to refresh it. For this one, discard 2 cards. This one, discard 1 card. Discard 2 cards. But then you have other weapons which are not quite the same, like the Rosmarinus, which when you can only use it against a non-boss enemy, but their attack suffers -1 speed and it loses all effects, and again 2 cards to refresh. Going to the Hunter's Dream refreshes it as well. The Hunter's Dream is like a complete reset of your character, so you would be able to regain all your health and reset all your cards. Then we have enemies who have 2 sides. And it's interesting they have 2 sides because it gives more replayability, and you also have specific cards for those hunters as well in case they turn nasty or if you have a mission to hunt one down. But they have 2 sides to make things a bit more interesting, but also you might want to pick and choose based on your hunter's build. I prefer to go completely random. Quite often in a hunt you will be expected to choose 3, or you'll be told to pick 3 and they will appear on the board on that side, but then things in the campaign may say spawn another enemy, so it's always wise to have these cards and their associated models to hand in any campaign, unless you already know what's coming. I'm going to move on to the maps. So, on the maps there are lots and lots of different tiles, and they all have certain things on them. So, an example here, Odin's Chapel, the entire tile would count as Odin's Chapel. The lantern is where hunters can spawn from the Hunter's Dream, and there's the effects of the tile. You can see that it's divided into 3 separate spaces, so a hunter could stand here, here, or here, and enemies on a motion, or a hunter on a motion, to move 1 from here may go 1, or may go 1. It also means going through this tile, you would have to go 1, 2, spend another card, and continue. Cards like this one, however, have got much bigger spaces, but this symbol indicates which enemy to spawn. It's not specific to any, it's just the place it's laid on the actual Hunter's Dream board. And the occupied house is this half, and it is specific to certain missions. If we go through, you can see different ones. You can also see these two are connected despite this wall because of this white line here. You can see the item token and the different enemy that spawns. And then you have the ransacked house, which is again key to certain missions, but may appear randomly in your hunt if you're told to draw random ones and you pick this one. 2 items and 2 enemies. And what's interesting about enemies, I'll put that one to one side, is that when you go through their space, they would follow you by 1, or if you leave their tile, they follow you by 1. And that's their pursuing. And then at the end of your turn, they will activate and follow you an extra time. So making sure you are far enough away from enemies is really important. But then we move back to this one, which is the central lamp, which is the starting one. And this is the one that you can interact with to teleport to any other lamp or inside the fog gate, which is important because you cannot just waltz up, or it might be even quicker to just teleport from there into the fog gate. A lot of these tiles are specific to certain hunts. The expansions include more tiles. These are just the core game ones. I have not seen them all because I've not done all the hunts, but there are certain ones in certain hunts where it says do not include this tile in this set. Moving away from these, let's go on to the actual trick weapons and hunters themselves. So here is the hunter dashboard. It's associated to the purple coloured hunter, which will have a ring underneath it. And you can see the elements of it. You've got your health, where you'd have 6 health tokens, your blood echoes, where you'd lay those, you have a maximum of 3, your firearm, and the bit for your trick weapon, which is where your hunter board would go. Now, hunters all have unique effects to them, dependent on which side of the board they're on. So here are the 3 slots available to the Sword Cleaver Hunter on this transformation. A quick cut, which is 3 speed, 1 damage, 2 speed, 2 damage, 1 speed, 3 damage. And the effect for this side is on any kill, you draw 1 and heal 1. At the bottom here, it lists the effects of the reverse. So an example, you can see that there is much quicker attacks with that shorter blade, 3 speed, 1 damage, 3 speed, 1 damage, 2 speed, 2 damage, but attacks with stagger also deal +1. And it's worth noting that it's easy to get lost in picking your favourite cards, the ones that look cool, the upgrades that you think are going to be the best. It's always worth considering what your hunter works with. This hunter probably wants an entire build centred around that stagger. Whereas the Threaded Cane Hunter, who I'm a big fan of, staggering enemies of the same speed. Fantastic. And her actual sidearm is that cannon, which is able to do a 3 damage, 1 speed attack. So it's almost like a final gambit. You know full well you're going to get hurt if you use that, but it works. Or the quicker version, where you're able to deal extra damage if you dodge to all enemies within 1 space. I'll go through all 3 of these. So we have the Hunter Axe Hunter, who is all about heavy damage, and on kill deals 2 damage to 1 enemy within 1 space, so you can almost have a chain reaction going. Or the reverse side with the shorter axe, all very consistent, and after attacking with this specific move you heal 1 for every damage you dealt. So you might want to build your entire hunter around dealing as much damage as possible, because if you can not just do 2, but 3 damage or 4 damage, you could get quite a lot of health back. And finally, Ludwig's Holy Blade Hunter. Each time you clear a slot, deal 1 damage to an enemy in your space. That's those dodgers clearing things, re-putting things on. Or this, with only 2 options, but after attacking with Combo Slash, this one, you can transform the weapon for free. So you do that attack, resolve everything, you can then switch back to that side, which is almost an easy way out because it costs 1 card spent, not placed on an attack slot, in order to transform the weapon. And finally, we have this board. This board tells you which enemies are going to get spawned. So if I had the Church Servant here and I reveal a map tile with this symbol, I will place a Church Servant. The chapter card is where you place what chapter you're on and the setup. Your 4 upgrades for the Hunter's Dream, so your weapon upgrades. And this tracks the hunt. And what happens with this is every time you finish a round, so everybody's finished all their turns, all enemy activations are finished, you move it along one. If a hunter chooses to go to the hunter's dream, you also move it along one. If a hunter dies, you also move it along one. So if all 4 hunters chose to go to the hunter's dream, you could have a 1, 2, 3, 4 and end up on this red spot. Now, ending up on the red spot isn't the end of the world, but what happens is all enemies on the map return to their spawn or are respawned. All enemies with any injuries are fully healed, including bosses. Nothing happens to hunters though. Hunters don't heal or reset or refresh. And the further along you get on this, the less time you have. When you get to this spot and you cannot move any further, you have one final round to finish. And it's an awful feeling because at that point, everything has just been re-healed. You have a final round afterwards to move. It's not going to last very long, so you really need to be in a good position by that point. And finally, I am going to very, very quickly have a look at these models and talk you through some of these. I'm not going to be getting them all out, as if you want to look at the actual models, you're more than welcome to watch the unboxing video. This is an info boxing. I'm going to keep this as plain and simple as possible. So you have boss enemies down here and here. We have simple enemies here. The actual hunters themselves, which I can get one out, would be on the board and would fit very nicely into one of these rings, the one associated to your hunter board colour. Don't necessarily need those, you should know which ones you're playing as. Then we have the actual enemies themselves. There are 4 of each, and the rule is if you need to spawn a 5th, you would take the one furthest away from any hunter and spawn them in the closest spot as necessary. These appear on the board. There is no limit to how many can fit in one space, to my understanding. So if you manage to get loads chasing you, you are going to have a very hard time, because on their activation, they each attack. And that's that. That's the info boxing. That is all the information I am able to give you for the core box. Hopefully it's been informative or answered any questions you may have had. If I have missed anything, got anything wrong, please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to learn. This is just to my understanding of how the components all work together. If you've been enjoying my playthroughs, I am intending to do a Chalice Dungeon one soon. How that will go, I do not know. I'm also intending to run another blind chapter in the coming weeks, but I don't just want to keep on playing Bloodborne solo. I would like to try and integrate some of those expansions that I've got. I'm still on the lookout for the Upper Cathedral Ward expansion if I can get my fingers on it. However, I'm rambling now. Thank you ever so much for sticking around for this info boxing. Until next time, I'll catch you later.